Lamar Jackson revealed a new slim current playing weight that he is at. We talk about what it means and a lot more coming up next year on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire, here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here today, making Locked On Ravens your first listen each and every single day. We're free and available on all podcasting platforms. That includes in video form on YouTube, where you can like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also in audio form, where you can like and subscribe as well, and also follow along there too. We do 5 days a week of daily Ravens content, Monday through Friday. So Ravens news, analysis, updates, the whole 9 yards. Tell a friend, tell a family member. We have them covered 5 days per week here on Locked On Ravens. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. It's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. We're back, midweek edition of the show, and we have a lot to talk about. Again, we're kind of still in the lull period of the offseason, but new things continue to come up, and so we're going to talk about it here. The big thing today is yesterday a clip dropped of Lamar Jackson talking about a bunch of different things. It was a thing with Complex where he was looking at, I think, fan tweets or something along those lines, and he revealed his current playing weight right now. So things can change. We're just talking today, currently, at least time of this interview. So we're going to be looking at what he said, what it means. We did talk a little bit about this. I think it was like a month ago, maybe, right when he walked into the castle I guess it was a couple weeks ago. Honestly, it wasn't super long ago. We're going to be talking about what he said and diving back into what this weight is, because it is a lot slimmer than we have been used to for Lamar over the last couple of years. Then in the second part of the show, we're going to be diving a bit into some early schedule theories for the Ravens. We'll go back over their 2024 opponents. We did get word that the schedule is going to be coming out on next Wednesday, so a week from today. So we'll be talking about that. And then finally, Eric DeCosta tells all in an interview on the Ryan Ripken Show. I am also a part of that show. And Ryan Ripken interviewed Eric DeCosta at the Castle. It was an awesome interview. I did all the technical stuff behind the scenes, editing that interview, and it was such a crazy day yesterday where I didn't have time to rip the audio and put it here. So we'll just talk about what he said, the stories that he had to say. But there were a lot, and some things about the current team, some things about some past Ravens teams. So a really good interview. If you want to watch it, I'll put the link in the description down below. We'll talk a little bit about it on this show right here today. So let's talk about Lamar Jackson, his new current playing weight. And I do want to preface it again by saying that even though he says he's at this weight, it doesn't necessarily mean this is what he's going to start the season at. Obviously, there is still time to get back up to a certain weight or just get to wherever he wants to be. But so in this interview, Lamar Jackson, he actually revealed the past 3 years. Well, technically 2. 2022, he said he was 230 pounds. 2023, said he was 215, right around that range. Now, though, he said he's 205 pounds. Again, 205 for Lamar Jackson right now. It's, again, a little bit slimmer than we've been accustomed to over the last couple of seasons. Obviously, really ever since that 2019-ish year, he's been bulking up, and we've seen the Lamar Jackson, he's jacked up with all the muscle he's been gaining over the years. But it seems like he has been trying to get it down a little bit. Now, there are pros and cons to both sides of this thing, right? For Lamar, adding the extra weight and the extra muscle obviously gives him an advantage in terms of his strength, in terms of him being able to absorb some of these hits a little bit better. But, maybe for him, and he's still a fast guy even at the weights he was at, but it did feel like, especially last year, I mean, the one example I look to is that crazy play where he caught his own ball against the Chiefs in the AFC Championship game. It feels like if he was at a little bit of a lower playing weight, or if he was just a little bit slimmer, he would have taken that to the house. But it felt like he just couldn't get away from guys as fast. And that's crazy to say, honestly, because he still got away from so many guys, made so many guys look silly. But back in that 2019 season, it felt like that MVP year, he was just like, now he's here. Now he's there. Now you can't see him. Now you see him. Now you don't. And he still had that element to him. I'm not saying, Lamar, the past 2-3 seasons has been so slow and he's just dragging behind everybody else. That's not what I'm saying. But it felt like Lamar, and I don't know, it almost felt like Lamar felt better. And again, I don't want to speak for him, but that's just my theory here, is that he felt a little better playing at a little bit less weight. And that's fine. Again, whatever Lamar feels comfortable doing, that's okay. And now look, he won the MVP in 2023, as he said, at that 215 pounds. So to him, it's just where he feels comfortable. And again, just because he's 205 pounds now doesn't mean he's going to be 205 when the season starts. Maybe he will be. But again, either way, Lamar has to feel comfortable. And not that he, not that he wasn't comfortable before, but again, speed is a big element of Lamar's game, right? The elusivity, the agility, he had that all. He has not lost any of that, but I do think that it sometimes gets lost a little bit of, that 0.1 extra second, right? That 0.2 extra seconds, 0.3. That can make a difference sometimes. And for Lamar, it just felt like he was getting caught a little bit more. Even on the play, sorry to bring up the AFC Championship game again, but on that, what was it, the 4th and inches play somewhat early in the game when the Ravens let him run that ball, it just felt like he would have just taken the sideline and gotten ahead of, I think it was the L'Jarius Sneed who ended up bringing him down at that time, but he couldn't get past him. And maybe that was, just him being banged up. Everybody was banged up at that time of year. But again, it felt like if he was playing a little bit of a lesser weight, he could have gotten away from L'Jarius Sneed, because we've seen him get away from guys time and time again. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see just what Lamar is going to be able to do if he does go into the year at 205 or maybe around 205. Maybe he gets up to like 210 or something before the season starts, which would still be less than the 215 that we saw him at, or at least around the 215 we saw him at in 2023. Now, him being 230 in 2022, again, he was absorbing the hits, making sure that happens. But to me, I feel like Lamar, and this goes back to, honestly, his rookie season, it really hasn't been an issue for him ever since his rookie year. So I'm not too worried about it in terms of absorbing hits. But his rookie season was the one where he would take an extra hit to get a yard, and he wouldn't go out of bounds to get a yard. And then he'd get clobbered. And he was playing even then at a lesser weight. And those were, I probably would have taken that hit. I would have gone out of bounds here. Outside of that, Lamar's gotten really good at, I guess, preserving his body, if you want to say that, preserving those hits, because it's true. Anytime you get hit in football, there's a chance for an injury, and that's just what it is. At the quarterback position, for Lamar, him being a dual threat player is so big. And so he needs to feel comfortable with the weight he's playing at. And again, I said it earlier, not that he wasn't quote unquote comfortable in 2022 and 2023, but it just feels like the way that he wants to play the game and the way that I think he feels best. And again, not speaking for him, but it feels like to me he's a guy that wants to play at a little bit lesser of a weight here. So at this point for Lamar, it's almost going back to like, is he about to be like this 2019 thing? And the whole thing on Complex, the actual quote was Lamar Jackson is definitely 2019 MVP season. Slim now, it may get spooky. And he said, oh, yeah, definitely. So he knows that he's been slimming down a little bit. And that's kind of the new game plan, I guess, for him. So this is where he wants to be. And I'm sure, he's established that plan with the Ravens and figured out, hey, this is where I feel like I want to be before the season starts. But you know what? I know some people are concerned about, should he be playing it at that slim of a weight? He needs to add or keep on some of that muscle to absorb those hits. I think personally it's okay. I mean, he was 230 in 2022. He ended up getting injured. It just happens, right? Just because you have more weight as a quarterback doesn't mean that you're going to totally avoid injury. Now, this, I do understand some of the risks of that and some of the worry. I'm not saying that, it's unfounded. I get it. But I think that if Lamar feels comfortable there, he adds some of that speed element back to him. Not that he didn't have it in the past 2 or 3 seasons, but you bring some of that back, that 2019 back. Hey, I think it could be a good thing for Lamar Jackson and just for the team in general, because it adds some of that element where in that AFC Championship game, if he gets away from those guys, we're looking, I think, at a different ball game there. So going to be interesting to see how Lamar handles that whole thing. I would expect him to probably add a little bit before the season starts, but probably still be below the 215 or maybe right at possibly the 215 he was at last season. But for now, he revealed it about 205 right now. So take that as you will. I know there are a lot of differing opinions on Lamar in that weight at the moment. Coming up, though, in the second part of the show, we'll talk about some early scheduled theories for the Ravens, talking about their opponents for 2024 and who could be slotted in where. Stay tuned, plenty to talk about on the show. First, the show is brought to you by FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big one of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. It's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Big Denver Nuggets guy here. Down 2-0 to the Timberwolves. They lost 2 games on their home floor. Not expecting them to come out of that series, but if you want to go over on FanDuel, bet on Nikola Jokic props, Anthony Edwards props, Jamal Murray will be available for Game 3 apparently. Did not get suspended, so you can bet maybe his props or maybe even Karl Anthony Towns. You can do that over on FanDuel. Visit FanDuel.com/lockdown to make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. We're back, our second segment of Locked On Ravens here on Wednesday. Kevin Oestreicher still talking with you here. We just talked about Lamar revealing his new current playing weight. And again, a lot of the differing opinions on that. But now let's move away from that and talk about some early schedule theories for the Ravens. Now, the NFL schedule, the full thing was expected to be released tomorrow on Thursday, but apparently there's a little bit of a delay there with the schedule. Reportedly, the NFL teams were sent in a memo that the regular season schedule is going to be released, or at least expected to be released, on next Wednesday, so a week from today, on May 15th. There was no mention for the delay and the expected date, but here we are. So we're waiting at least another week for this schedule to come out. Now, we already know the opponents that Baltimore is going to play. That was already set, but it's just a matter of when these teams play. So are the Ravens going to be playing a lot of early divisional games? Is it going to be later in the season? What's the prime time schedule going to look like? Now, we're going to talk about some early theories here for the schedule, because I was going to do a preview for the schedule, but of course, obviously with that not coming out for another week, we're going to save that till next week. So we're just going to do some theories for today. Now, the first one, and this one has been, I think, the hot topic, is who the opening game is going to be for the Ravens, because there are a lot of different possibilities that can happen. And the way that this could potentially look for Baltimore, you have a couple of options and some names, some teams that I think Ravens fans would prefer. Now, I don't know if honestly a lot of Ravens fans would prefer this one, but something that I've seen floating around, and again, I don't know any matchups, so I'm not trying to say, oh, this is going to be the matchup, so I don't know. But Kansas City, the Chiefs, in an AFC Championship rematch for Week 1. Now, the Ravens are going to Arrowhead this year, so that would be an away game. Now, obviously, for the defending champions, they open up the year at home. So that would give the Ravens matchup a possibility to be the Week 1 matchup. The Ravens traveling to Arrowhead, and that would obviously be the opening game. So that would be really interesting, because with the way that this is all going to work here, the Chiefs obviously have made some upgrades at some positions, but have lost some key guys elsewhere. But you know what? They have Patrick Mahomes, and he's the best quarterback in the world. So you got to respect what he does. Obviously, Lamar is great, and that Mahomes-Lamar matchup is always set to be a good one. But for Mahomes, look, you got to respect a guy that has the hardware, and I think that Lamar can take him down, right? But we're going to see if that's the case. Both teams, you would hopefully, knock on wood, that they will be healthy going into Week 1. And, you get the best shot of Kansas City early, and then you're done until I think the playoffs when you probably have to go through them again. But to me, I think there are two differing opinions of having Kansas City in week one. It's really already Kansas City, and there's optimism and then there's pessimism for different people. I'm indifferent to it. I mean, Kansas City would be a really tough week one challenge, but at the same time, I think it'd be good for them to kind of have that go in week one and then focus on the rest of their schedule. Another one that I could see, and it's been, I guess, floated a tiny bit. I forget by who, but maybe the Steelers. Could that be them coming to town in week one? M&T Bank Stadium. Could that be a night game potentially? Baltimore, I think an opening week primetime game for the Ravens would honestly be kind of cool. I mean, they're going to be playing a bunch of 1 p.m. games this year, but if I had to guess, the Ravens are going to get maxed out on primetime games this year. I would assume, just me assuming here, that the NFL wants Lamar Jackson in primetime, right? That's a pretty fair assumption. I think that's a pretty fair assumption to have. So I think the Ravens could be maxed out on primetime games. If I had to guess the 5, if I had to guess them, Kansas City being one of them, I think the NFL can't mess that one up. Then I think you get one of the Pittsburgh games, whether it's home or away. I think you get that one. Do we get a Thanksgiving Ravens-Steelers game again? Could happen. Then I think Buffalo could be one. That's a home game for Baltimore. Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen. I know the Bills are looking a bit different without Stephon Diggs in the fold and a bunch of other guys. Honestly, they've lost a bunch. I think the NFL will probably give the Bengals game. So I think what will happen is, and again, you could go both for one, or I guess both for both. But I'd assume the NFL gives one Pittsburgh game and then one Cincinnati game, with one being away for the Ravens and one being at home for Baltimore. And then there are a couple of, for the 5th one. So I think Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, Buffalo, Kansas City are my 4 of them. I'm like, all right, I feel pretty confident about that. But then the 5th, I could see Philadelphia, Baltimore being a primetime game. I could see Baltimore, Houston being a primetime game. Maybe Baltimore, Dallas being a primetime game. Chargers, Tampa. The ones that I can't see being primetime games, I think the Raiders one, Denver, Washington, the Giants. I mean, I could see Cleveland. I mean, I'm not going to predict that's a primetime game, but I could see Cleveland being a prime. Those divisional games are great. I mean, AFC North games, they're super physical. Now, to me, I think that what I'm anticipating is the Ravens. I mean, it's so tough. It's so hard to predict, especially early here, because we can talk about opening games. I mean, obviously, last game of the year, divisional opponent. Who would I prefer? I mean, I guess Cleveland. If I had to predict, I guess they'd play Cleveland in the final week of the season. I think we've had a bunch of Pittsburgh last game of the season games. We've seen a bunch of those. Well, not a bunch of, but we've seen Cincinnati too. I think that, I guess I'm just going to predict Cleveland. That it's kind of just up in the air at that point, where you can say what you want about, oh, well, they could play this team there. They could play that team here, but it gets really hard to predict. Now, in terms of their actual opponents, let's just run through them, because I don't think I've actually done that. Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Cincinnati, Las Vegas, Denver, Buffalo, Washington, Philadelphia. Those are the home opponents. The away opponents: Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Cincinnati, Kansas City, Los Angeles, Dallas, Houston, New York, Tampa. Now, there was something that came out. I can't remember who put it on. I'm going to try to find it really quickly, but it was about the Ravens and their schedule, and they are playing, I believe, 10 playoff teams, if I'm not mistaken. So that's a lot of playoff teams. I'm not going to lie, but look, yeah, here we go. League high 10 2023 playoff teams. Second toughest strength of schedule in 2024. You know what? Look, you got to be tested. If the Ravens want to get this thing done, they want to win a Super Bowl, you got to go through the best. And you do that in the regular season. You get those tests. The Ravens were tested a lot last season, especially in December. Right now, it didn't work out that way. Well, it didn't work out in their favor last year, but I think still it was good to have the tests of going to really good teams, playing really good teams, and clobbering them. They passed their tests. A lot of the games for Baltimore was, they're playing the Dolphins. That's going to be a close game. No, Ravens annihilate. 49ers, that's a Christmas night game, going to be close. No, annihilate. So I think having a tough schedule is a good thing in some ways. Now, obviously, a lot of people want the easier teams, the easier schedule, but for Baltimore, they're gonna have to earn it this year, right? Both in the regular season and in the playoffs. So, gonna be one heck of a ride. We're gonna see when the Ravens actually play these teams coming up. Apparently, it's expected next Wednesday. Coming up, though, in the final part of the show, we'll talk about what Eric DeCosta had to say on the Ryan Ripken Show, because he had some very interesting things to say, not only about his strategy when building the Ravens, but also a bunch of stories from not only the past couple of years, but teams of Ravens past. So be sure to stay tuned, plan to talk about on the show. First, the show is brought to you by Monopoly Go. All right, game off. We got to pause here to talk more about Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying, flag on the play. I already talked about that, but there's just so much good stuff in this game. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for time tournaments where you work together to build each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock, and there's so much to get. Unique stickers you can trade with friends to complete albums for big prizes, cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with, hilarious emojis for taunting friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton include their own unique mini games like digging for treasure on a robot Pachinko machine, and there's always new time events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go, so get off the bench and go download it now, free on the Google Play or the App Store. Game on. We're back. Our final segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still here with you. Really appreciate everybody again for making Locked On Ravens your first listen every day here. It really means a ton. We've built such a great community here on Locked On Ravens. A bunch of communities, honestly, in video form and audio form, social media, subtext. Been doing this thing for, again, almost 5 years now. Going to be 5 years in August, which is crazy to think about. 2019. It's a lot that we've done here on this show, a lot of building, and it's not possible without the communities that we have. So if you're an everyday, I really appreciate you tuning in each and every day here to the show. If you're new, welcome in, welcome along for the ride. Hopefully you enjoy the content. Be sure to like and subscribe here, video form, audio form. And if you're somewhere in the middle, welcome back to the show. Now, it was a super busy day for me yesterday and the entire Ryan Ripken Show crew. Went to the castle. I stayed behind to make sure everything was technically good on the back end, but Ryan and the crew went over to the castle and interviewed Eric DeCosta there. Was an incredible interview. Again, be sure to check it out. The link will be in the description down below. 35 minutes Eric gave us, was really gracious with his time. Really appreciate him and the Ravens for making it possible. Now, I was so busy I wasn't able to rip any audio from it. We're just going to talk about what he said here today, but he told a lot of awesome stories. He was really open about everything. It was a really, really cool interview. And as I have kind of teased here, he didn't just talk about kind of the plan that goes into building Baltimore, but he had a couple of really behind-the-scenes stories, and I'm going to put those out. If you're listening to this, they're going to already be out on Twitter and on social media. But a couple of really cool stories and just a behind-the-scenes look at some of these decisions the Ravens have made in the past, so Ravens teams past there. So Eric talked a lot about the draft. I mean, Ryan did a great job of asking him, a bunch about the roster building and roster construction, and especially when it comes to valuing draft picks and figuring out, for Eric, what the strategy for him and the team is. And for him, it's, draft picks are valuable, but he mentioned, especially with like the Roquan trade, you have to balance out draft picks with guys that are going to help your team and be an X factor, be a catalyst. And that to me is huge because look, teams spend their draft capital in a bunch of different ways, whether it's actually during the draft on certain players, their strategy there, but there are other ways to use it, like in trades. And so with Eric, him working under Ozzie Newsome for so many years, and he's worked with Ozzie for so many years now, obviously Ozzie still has a role with the team, but we've seen Eric DeCosta be pretty aggressive when it comes to trading, considering what the Ravens, they love draft picks. We know. Eric DeCosta, he loves the draft. And there are all these technicalities that go into it in terms of him calculating out, he has charts and boards and everything. And we knew that, right? But for him, for example, trading for Roquan, that was a second round pick. And the Ravens, I mean, when that trade happened, it was like, whoa, the Ravens traded a second round pick like that. That's unheard of. They love these early picks. How could they part with that? But Eric DeCosta talked about how you're not going to trade picks every draft, or you're not going to trade draft picks every draft for the deadline. So it's not like, okay, every single trade deadline, let's just get rid of the picks. That's not how it works. Obviously, the Ravens haven't made a move every single trade deadline. But when there's a guy like a Roquan who becomes available, someone who can be an X factor and a catalyst, like I mentioned, that to me and to Eric as well is like, oh, okay. Yeah, that's a good use of draft capital. And we know that the Ravens are always going to get kind of that influx for the most part of comp picks. So that might have something to do with it as well. But it has to be a balance. And Eric certainly understood that. And he has understood it over the course of his career, which has helped the Ravens a ton when it comes to the strategy around drafting guys. But then he told a couple of stories too. One of them was about Ed Reed, where he wanted Napoleon Harris, or the team, I guess, wanted Napoleon Harris, and he was the 17th rated guy on their board. And he was available. They were picking at 24, but then he goes 23. And Eric DeCosta was a Midwest scout, and he ended up, that was his school, so it was going to be a first-round pick for him. I mean, he said he was devastated that they didn't get Napoleon Harris. So who'd they settle for? Just this unknown safety, this undersized guy, Ed Reed from Miami. You might have heard of him before. It was my first time hearing about him yesterday when he said, no, I'm kidding. Obviously, it worked out for the best. Napoleon Harris, I do not know. And Eric DeCosta said he did not know where Napoleon Harris is today. Ed Reed, we know how successful of a career he had, his Hall of Fame career. So sometimes it works out that way, right? Where you really want a guy, he goes, but it's a blessing in disguise. And that certainly was, because Baltimore was set, and DeCosta revealing there, they were going to take Napoleon Harris, and Ed Reed was the guy there. So DeCosta also talked about the Jimmy Smith thing that happened in 2011. For those who weren't aware, what happened there, the Ravens, I forget what pick they were. They might have been 26, if I'm not mistaken. Somewhere along those lines. I forget exactly. But they had a trade with the Bears to move back because they knew that Jimmy Smith was going to be available 4 spots later. So the Bears and the Ravens had a trade that was going to go through. They agreed on it. And the Ravens were celebrating, DeCosta said, but the trade doesn't go through because the Bears don't call it in. So what happens is, the time expires and the Chiefs jump the Ravens, because what happens if your time expires, you don't call in your pick, or nothing happens with a trade, you get jumped by the team behind you. So the Ravens got jumped by Kansas City, and they took John Baldwin, DeCosta said, who was the wide receiver out of Pittsburgh, I believe. But the Ravens, instead of saying, all right, we'll just do the trade now, I think it was a 4th-round pick, Eric DeCosta said there. But instead of taking the trade, I mean, they panicked and picked Jimmy Smith because they wanted, obviously, you got to secure your guy, right? And DeCosta was super upset. And Ozzie, he knew it. He's like, no, I'm not okay. Missed out on a draft pick. And that was a lot. So going back, and they went back to Eric DeCosta's office, and DeCosta, he said he tore his Achilles. And DeCosta, he can be a prankster. So he was telling us some stuff about Les Mis and Phantom of the Opera, where Ryan was calling him out on some stuff. And it was a very funny part there. But DeCosta said that he went back, he tore his Achilles, so he was on crutches, went back to his office and slammed the crutch on his desk, and the crutch broke, the desk broke. So that's what he told us. So pretty crazy story. And the last one is about Joe Flacco, actually, where the Ravens did a bunch of maneuvering up and down the draft board. They traded from 6th to 26th, then back up, I think, to 18 or 12. I can't remember when Flacco was drafted, but they wanted Flacco, and they moved up and down, or down and then up, to go and get him. But then DeCosta wanted to trade back in the 2nd round to get the pick that he traded to go back. And he told Steve Bisciotti, he said, oh, well, we're going to get the same guy anyway. And Bisciotti's like, I don't know about that. I don't think we are. And DeCosta said, yeah, we will. I'll only trade up here. I'll only do this if I can trade back and get the pick back. So they did, and it worked out because they got Flacco and they got Ray Rice a bit later in the 2nd round. So DeCosta, he's so calculated and technical with how all this stuff works. Really, really smart football mind, and just honestly a really cool person. Like he was very open about a bunch of things. We asked him a bunch of fun questions too, talked about movies and a bunch of other stuff. So that's another part of it. And I've talked about this for years on this show. When we talk about sports and players, coaches, executives, whatever, I think sometimes it can be, these guys, they go out on the field on Sundays, or they coach on Sundays, they make these moves, they're a part of this big organization, but these guys are human. And that to me is like, it's so cool to kind of get the backstories about these guys because they are just like you. They are just like me. They're people, right? And to hear those stories, their likes, their dislikes, things about, so just even if it's like little topics here and there, that part of it is awesome to me. So Ryan does a great job with the human element and not just, strictly talking football the whole time. And I think that way, you get better rapport with the person. So it's, again, an awesome interview. Be sure to check it out. The link will be in the description down below. DeCosta was great. So I appreciate Eric for his time. We all do. And again, crazy because also, we went directly after this, we went up to Hollywood Charlestown Casino with the races there. And it was awesome. We had a live show up there, did an Orioles watch along. So crazy day. But it was worth it 100%. That's all I have for you here today, though, on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe, follow along, video form, audio form, the whole 9 yards. Coming up tomorrow, of course, more Ravens content coming your way. Stay tuned. Got plenty to talk about. I'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.